Some of you might think that the attire that I have chosen for this webinar is rather awkward. And I agree with you, it is awkward. And personally, I don't usually conduct my online events aimed at my fellow teachers dressed this way. However, I've chosen it to show you what the life of some teenagers is. And I think a teenager in a hoodie, always willing to hide from everybody, always reserved, always uncertain about everything around them, is a very good image to think about teenagers. And being dressed this way, I can personally relate to that age much better. And I hope this image will help you understand your teenagers better. Because today we're going to talk about adolescence. Adolescence, a very important period of time, because I'm sure if I asked you right now, who of you remembers yourself during your teenage years? I think we all of us remember those years. Probably not as the most pleasant years of our lives, but as very important years, and years that leave a lot of memories, years that can leave a lot of traumas, and that is why it's so important to talk about it, because the whole course is about teaching teenagers. However, I do think that we are lucky, because we actually have one of the subjects that goes in line with the leading activity of teenagers, with interpersonal communication. So our goal today is to move from better understanding of a teenage mind and teenage development, of the things that are happening with them physiologically and psychologically, to more effective communication with teenagers. Because this is the goal. We want to communicate with them more efficiently so that they study the language. And as I have just said, language is one of the best subjects, developmentally one of the best subjects for teenagers. Now let's think about when it starts, because one of the trickiest things with teenagers, for us as teachers, is that the period before teenage years, the previous period of time, the primary school years, is actually one of the best learning times for us humans, right? This is the time where we have very diligent students willing to learn, who always volunteer, who still have very fragile self-concepts, who still are not really into critical thinking, because for them, the world is white and black, like this is good and this is bad. Good students behave this way and bad students behave that way. So in a way, it's a very good period of time for them and for us teachers, right? They feel secure. Normatively, the self-esteem of the self-evaluation of a primary schooler, as just like with preschoolers, is higher than their regular skills level. You ask them, can you do this? Say, yes, I can. Can you do that? Yes, I can. And then it all changes. And it all starts with puberty, because all of a sudden, they get a new body, right? They get a new body that they cannot control. The body that is constantly changing. That's why the hoodie, you are not sure how to react to the new body that you have. And you feel very insecure about that. Just imagine you wake up tomorrow in a different body and you don't know what the day after tomorrow is going to be like. This is very stressful and very challenging. That's why teenagers are so insecure overall, because they and another thing that happens at the same time is the hormonal changes, and they lead to their partial inability to control their behavior. And that's another thing that is very challenging, and that needs a lot of resource. That's why some teenagers are not that good at learning, because their brain is working on other very important tasks. So it starts with puberty. The age is different. Now most people agree it's somewhere between 10 and 12 or 10 and 13. Although with some children, especially children who are more physically developed than their peers, or overweight children, puberty can kick in earlier. The reason is that when the body is larger, for example, when we have accumulated some body weight already, the body starts to think that it's time to start puberty. However, psychologically and socially, these children are still in their 5th grade or their 6th grade, and the whole society around them, the whole environment, is not at all ready for them to become teenagers, because we think of this time as the years where they are still supposed to be normal kids, right? So with some of them, and with those for whom puberty starts earlier, these are usually the most challenging cases. And then you have a normative developmental regression. Because the brain allocates most of its resources to support this enormous growth and also the development of the new areas of the brain. That's what I'm going to talk about a little later. Most of the resources are allocated to support it. So less resource is allocated towards learning new things and new concepts. That is why they are not that good at learning. And one of the regressions that I'm going to talk about in particular today is their regression in spoken skills. And you can see it in their mother tongue when teenagers who were very good kids, who were in their 5th form or 5th grade, could produce good sentences in English. They could use because, they could build complex sentences. Suddenly, in their 7th grade, are unable to talk. And even in their mother tongue, it all goes like, that thing, that's normative, because that's what happens, right? The brain allocated the resource in a different place, so they are not able to communicate as well as they were able to communicate back then. But what you should remember is that this is now a totally new person. So the person that you used to communicate with when they were 5th or 4th or 3rd grade is practically a different person, and we will discuss why today. And it's a huge emotional crisis. First, it comes from the physical inability to control their emotions that is connected to puberty. And secondly, it's connected with these new image of themselves that they are forming. As you can see, a lot of cognitive tasks that they have to perform around this age. That is why it's so challenging to teach teenagers. So we are pretty much clear, and the overall developmental psychology is pretty clear about when adolescence begins, between the age of 10 and 12. But now I want you to try and do the following. For the next 2 minutes, try and Google, when does adolescence finish? Give me the finishing time for adolescence. And that's the question that I'll leave you with for the next couple of minutes. Found the date? Well, actually, I'd be very surprised if you would, because there is no clear ending time. Usually, people say that adolescence ends at the period between 20 and 30, and there is the physiological end to adolescence. That's usually around the age of 20, up to 24 though. But the psychological end of adolescence is when people become an independent member of society. And you might look around and think of a lot of cases where you look at a person who is, say, in their far in their 20s or even in their 30s, and say that's still an adolescent, because this, like, whether they are fully independent in the society, whether they have actually realized who they are, because that's the easiest question that you can ask to understand whether the person has already whether the person has solved all the adolescence puzzles or not, is, do you actually know who you are? And if people who got through their adolescence, they have an idea about that. People who have not, well, to some extent, they are still adolescent, and that's challenging. That's why there is no exact age. If you think about the definition of adolescence, is the period of human development. You have the slide in front of you that starts with puberty, right? We have already discussed it. You started when you are 10 to. It starts when you are 10 to 12 years of age. And it ends with physiological maturity. So here, the American Psychological Association, that's where I took the definition from, they use a nice way out. They only define the end of the physiological end of adolescence, because as I said, we cannot really say the age, tell the age when adolescence finishes psychologically for most people. And you can see that there are major changes occurring across all areas of human life, and now we are going to look at those changes in more detail. First, changes at varying rates in physical characteristics. One important thing is that those changes occur at varying rates, and that's super challenging, because in one group of 8th graders, you would have girls who are already far in their adolescent years. So the girls who are already, say, 2 or 3, who have been going through it for 2 or 3 years. You would have boys for whom adolescence has already started, and they are changing, and they understand that they need to behave in a different way, and that's like another group of boys. You would have boys who are just entering their adolescence and who are just experiencing the best of their puberty and can't control themselves when they are next to those girls who are already 2 or 3 years into their adolescence. And in the same classroom, you would have somebody for whom adolescence has not yet started and who are looking around, they are willing to study, and they don't understand what's going on with the people around them. And all of them would sit in the same classroom. All of them were born in the same year, and that's like very challenging, very puzzling. Most naturally, people are very interested about their sexual characteristics, and they demonstrate a lot of sexual interest around this time. Actually, if I were a psychologist, I think the word sexual and the word sex would be in every second slide of mine, because if you try to understand teenage mind or adolescent mind, the word is there and it occurs approximately at that rate. However, as we are educators here, I'm not going to focus my attention on that. Just mentioning that it is a very important dilemma for adolescents. And that's actually when they understand who they are and what their preferences are and what their interests are. So this is the time when we developmentally solve that task for ourselves. Also, you have this changing body image, right? So you have the physical body that other people see, but also you have the body image inside their adolescent mind. And that is sometimes very different from real life. It has everything to do with people thinking they are more corpulent than they really are, people who think they are thinner than they really are. Very sensitive. This is a very sensitive topic. Personally, I avoid this topic in my communication with teenagers just because it's so sensitive. You never know what your comment about their new hairstyle can result in. That's why be super careful. Personally, I would usually stay out of this topic, all right? Or I would discuss this topic on other people, like famous actors or celebrities. That's where you can discuss fashion, clothes, and body. Self-concept. The self-concept of a teenager is being built. That is why there is very little of this thing called self-concept around this age. Because basically in the previous age period, in the previous period of time, the self-concept was very clear, you know. I'm a student of school number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm mommy's daughter, daddy's son, or daddy's daughter. So I'm part of this family. I'm from Russia. And that's it. And then, you know, you don't ask any further questions, because in the book there are no further questions. There are the questions: how old are you? What you like? What you dislike? It's all very clear. You know, you learn the answers and then you reproduce them. And that's what we've been doing since the age of 2, right? You know, what's your name? How old are you? What do you like? What are the things that you don't like? And then at the age of 7, you also acquired that there are socially acceptable things and socially desirable things, such as, like, you know, if you say that cleaning up is good, then it's good. It's like, you know, saying I like cleaning up the mess on my desk is a good thing. So you say to whoever asks you, right? Everything crystal clear. You answer this way, you get a 5 or a high 5 or whatever positive reinforcement you guys use. You know, doing homework is a good thing. So I like doing homework. Or people around me say that doing homework is challenging. Probably my parents say that doing homework is challenging. So I say that I don't like doing homework. Also a clear thing. They don't really answer those questions for themselves. They answer the questions based on the information they have acquired. And this is very different at teenage years. The teenager gets the capacity for critical thinking. And that is why a teenager has to answer all of those questions to himself, saying, okay, yes, my age is 14, but am I young or am I old? Am I an adult or am I still a child? This is a very big question. What is it that I like? Like before that, I used to like bananas. But maybe I like bananas because my mother always gave me bananas, and I don't know that there are many other fruit that I can try, fruit types that I can try. Maybe. Do I like doing home assignments or do I dislike doing home assignments? Well, most people around me say that doing home assignments, doing homework is not cool. Am I cool if I like doing homework? A lot of questions. Constant questioning of everything, right? That is what teenagers are all about. That's why sometimes in order to focus on those questions, you really need to hide in your hood so that other people don't distract you from thinking about those very important things in your life. And the self-esteem, because of that, actually gets normatively lower. Whenever I teach my university students to work with teenagers, we always do the following exercise. I divide them into groups of 3, and there is one person who is the teacher, and one person who is the student. Now, the role of the teacher is to try and teach the student something. The role of the student is to try and learn this something that the teacher is teaching. And the third person, we call this role the internal voice. So this person would take a sheet of paper, roll it up this way, and then would whisper all kinds of stuff into the ear of the person who is the student. They would whisper things about their appearance, their friends, their social environment, and this is the internal voice that is constantly in the ear of your teenagers. So it's, in a way, it's a competition. You are trying to distract them from this eternal voice so that they can focus on what you have to teach them. But understanding that the voice is there, and later on the whole social environment is there, is very important. Right? And that's why with this, you never know who you are, and that's why, because you don't know who you are, your self-esteem is lower than it should be. Normatively low self-esteem. That's what I was talking about. Because you don't know, you constantly don't know. And because in the previous period of time you've learned that knowing is actually a good thing, not knowing is a bad thing. And that is why it's insecure, it's very uncertain, it's very anxious, and the teenagers are very anxious because of that. That is why it's just one of the things, even if they don't show you this low self-esteem, because there are teenagers whose reaction is more aggressive to it, right? They, on the contrary, that say that they know everything and they have already learned your English and they can do all the state exams. This is defensive reaction. They don't, very often, they don't really think so. They just, telling you that they know everything probably makes them feel a little more confident, and to a large extent it's not really about them knowing everything, and it's not about the actual point of discussion of whether they do or don't know the stuff. It's more about your reaction, because they are constantly probing boundaries. One cool capacity that develops around this age, and that is not really existent before that age, before puberty, is abstract thinking. The first thing that it's connected with is personality. Abstract thinking actually helps us realize that we are a different personality, that we are different from our parents. And because of that, we start thinking about who we are and what personality traits we have. And what personality traits it's cool to have. What are the desirable personality traits? And what if we don't possess those traits? So personality is an abstraction, is basically an abstraction. It's an abstract concept. That's why we can really teach it around this age, because this is the age when it becomes meaningful. Useful hint, give them personality tests in English. Probably not, don't take low quality personality tests that tell you things about yourself, because no personality test can really tell you things about yourself, right? It's a kind of a game or a language activity. But what you can do, you can give them some of those tests which would have your target language, ask them to complete that test, and then discuss whether the information in the test, whether the test is right, whether the test works for them or it doesn't work for them, whether the information that they have acquired about themselves corresponds or does not correspond with what they think about themselves. So personality, a very abstract thing. Because before that, if you ask a primary student, what's your personality, they answer with the phrases that they have learned, right? So it's not really them thinking about their personality. Reevaluation of reality. Because we get this new idea of us being really different from our parents, it starts with being different from the parents, because before that it was all about us and parents, us and parents, us and family, us and school. But now, as we understand that we are different human beings, then probably we need to reconsider our attitudes, probably we need to reevaluate, and the thing that happens around that age, just like it happens at the age of 3 when children realize that they are physically independent from their mothers and they want to do everything themselves, right? You probably can remember a situation when you came into into a lift or an elevator together with a mom and her 3-year-old or 3.5-year-old child, and you made this terrible mistake of pressing the button before that child. The tantrum that you can experience can be huge, because I wanted to press that button myself. And just like with 3-year-olds who want to do everything themselves and are not always capable of doing everything themselves, right? Like tying their shoelaces or getting dressed. They want to get dressed themselves, but they can't do it very, very often. They are just unable to do that. And then they experience huge distress about this. The same thing happens to teenagers, right? I'll control my home assignments myself, they tell you. And then you have problems with them not being able to manage their time because they spend the whole evening in their social networks. Or and the parents have to interfere with that. Or I will go to that party and everything will be all right, I'll control it. And then it happens to be different, right? The same thing, they want to be able to do it themselves, they want to make their own decisions, but very often they are not yet mature enough to make those decisions, and that results in huge distress. And also it's very easy to see it in habits, because the habits, the likes and the dislikes change a lot around this age. Because things that they used to like suddenly turn uncool, right? So they want to focus on cooler things, and things that they didn't like before or haven't tried before suddenly become cool, and this can be a problem. So this reevaluation is happening all the time, and we as teachers can help and guide in this reevaluation, even though we don't need to be too intrusive. Otherwise, we can actually put them off this way. Altering points of view. Because the teenagers are figuring out who they are changing their points of view very often. And you would have a student who is 1 year liking this kind of music and hanging out with this group of people, and then next year it's the opposite type of kind of music and the opposite group of people. So the point of view, they change a lot around this age, because it's all about experimentation. It's all about seeing who you really are and trying different things so that you actually realize who you are. And here, one of the things is that very often accepting a system of rules and norms that is characteristic for a certain group of people is a very tempting thing to do for teenagers. That's why teenagers are that much into subcultures. Because, if you decide that you are a football fan of a certain football club, here is, you don't need to figure out who you are. Here are the rules of behavior, the dress code, the likes and the dislikes, even the words that you have to say. Everything is prescribed. Very easy, right? You just learn it, and there you go. Unfortunately, life is more complex than that. And if they never figure that out, then they can still be in their adolescence 10 years later. So this is a very important task that we as language teachers have, is asking them questions about who you really are. I do understand that you like hip-hop and hip-hop culture and you want to become a famous rapper. Okay, if that's but what are the songs what are you going to sing about? Okay, yeah, I know there are other singers who sing about this, but what are you going to sing about? And how are you, there are many rappers, what's going to be your special thing? These are the questions that we ask them. And then we challenge those points of view so that we can make it less black and white for them, because this choice of subculture to some extent can be this running back into this black and white period of time, just with different people around. Reconsidering their experience. They develop different attitudes to what has happened to them before. That's why it's very good to talk. Teenagers are normatively egocentric. They like talking about themselves. Well, some of them don't like talking at all, but they like thinking about themselves at the very least. That's why thinking about their experience, thinking about the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to them, or the most interesting thing that has ever happened to them, is a very good thing. And these questions are very relevant for teenagers. Forming new values. This is a very important task that we face around this period of time. And actually, the values that they form around these years, they are the real values that they would highly likely carry throughout their lives. That's why we do talk about values, and we ask them about their values, and we challenge if we see that they just replicate the values of a certain celebrity, role model, or their peers. We ask them, okay, you say these things are important for you, but if we rank them on a scale from 1 to 5, which is the most important value for you? Future scenarios. Teenagers do think about the future. That starts at the age of 14, 15, and their picture of the future is very fragile. It changes a lot, but it's a very important concept for them. That's why you also discuss future scenarios with them, and what they want to do in the future, and what kind of person they'll be in 10 or 5 years. And what you will figure out is that very often they don't have an answer. So here you are, discuss it in English, and help them to come up with at least a working model for what they want to be in a certain period of time. And reflection, thinking about what has happened, thinking about behavior of the teenager, him or herself, and other people around. This is a very important exercise for this age, because this is how you figure out what social relationships are. This is how you figure out who you really are. Reflection is super important around this age. Now, the leading activity, as I have already said today, is interpersonal communication with peers. And here, you might think that it's very sad that this is the period of time when we actually give them most tests and exams. But on the other hand, if you think about the aims of learning language, which is communication, I hope you see it the same way as I do, that the goal of the ultimate aim of learning any language is communication. I think that for us, it's actually a very good tool. It's very instrumental that their leading activity is communication, and we actually have the class which is all about communication, the subject that is built around communication. So if you give them a chance to communicate in your class, and you can set borders, you can say that this communication has to be in English in your class, you can, and if you build this communication around the tasks that are meaningful for them, you can actually have a very interesting dynamic and very efficient classroom. Now, what does it mean? It means that they are more interested in peer-related activities. Teenagers are more interested in communicating with their peers than they are in communicating with adults. Because this is their main aim in life at this period of time, to learn to function in their group of peers, because that's who they will have to live with, right? So educationally, it is very important that we give them a chance to figure this out. Otherwise, they might later on have a lot of trouble communicating with people around them. Because if we think about development all in all, there are different lines of development. We have the physical development, we have the psychological development, the emotional development, we have the cognitive development, the intellectual development, the artistic development. These are all different lines of development. The development of logic and critical thinking, all of them are very important. But what we try and achieve in education wants to balance them. We want a person who is well-rounded, a person who has a well-balanced personality. That is why we work together with the leading activity. The leading activity being interpersonal communication with peers. Peer-related activities must be incorporated into your teaching. More independence. In a way, teenagers strive for more independence because that's how they figure out who they are. They can't figure it out if other people constantly tell them what to do. That's why they are striving for more independence and more autonomy, more independent decision making. And they are not, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that 12-year-old children are ready for autonomy, can function autonomously. No, they can't. It's our task to teach them to become more autonomous throughout their learning, throughout their teenage years. How do we do that? We can, for instance, we can do it through projects, right? Where they have to take some of the responsibility for what's going to happen, where they are responsible for the final product, and where they can make choices throughout this. Then probably the choice of their key subjects around the ninth grade is going to be much easier for them, because I've heard a lot of discussion of whether it's the right age for children to decide about what they want to focus on at the age of 15, 16, 14. And this discussion takes place all around the world, because in the UK, for instance, it's the same, right? Students complete their GCSEs at the age of 15, 16, and then they have to focus on 4 or 5 subjects. And the same in Russian, it's a little more in Russia, it's a little more comprehensive. So you actually don't choose 4 subjects or 5 subjects, you choose the main focus. But still, many parents are seriously concerned, saying that, students can't choose around this age, they can't decide. Well, it's their developmental task to learn to decide, so that they can make this important decision when they are 15 or 16, when they complete their 9th grade. So we guys can give it a little more effort. We can spend a little more time discussing what their favorite subjects are, what their favorite activities are, what they want to do in the future, telling them more about different jobs, and helping them to make this very important decision. And then because they are around their peers, one more thing that is of fundamental importance for teenagers is social acceptance. Because the worst thing that can happen to a teenager is realizing that their peers don't like them and don't want them. That's why be super careful about how you give feedback. Be super careful about all the comments that you make about them. And never try to put the group of teenagers against one teenager or 2 teenagers, right? Never support bullying, because for a teenager, this can have a really tragic effect, right? Because they are all about social acceptance. If they fail at the most important thing in their lives, at communication with their peers, the results can be really bad. Now let's look at this case. I want you to think about Mark. Mark is 15. He has just come to your school, and his previous school was not that strong in terms of English. So let's imagine that your school specializes in English, and the previous school did not. So during the first lesson, as he was introducing himself, he made a couple of errors in the use of present simple and present continuous that you corrected. Since then, he has been refusing to talk in your lesson. He can do reading, listening, grammar, and vocabulary activities from time to time. In your lessons, he usually sits alone in the far corner of the classroom, and he doesn't disturb anyone, but he doesn't contribute either. I will now give you 3 minutes to think about this task, and can you please write down some thoughts that you have about this case? Can you please try to interpret and to mentalize what's happening inside Mark's mind, and what you can probably do to work on this particular situation? I'm giving you 3 minutes. Think about it. You will hear some music. If you find the music disturbing, just pause the recording, go 3 minutes forward, and you will hear my comments about this particular case. Okay, let's look at it together. As you can see, if you try to interpret this behavior of one of your students, of Mark, you can probably see that the reason why he behaves this way can be in the fact that he is really not confident in being accepted by other people when he speaks. Actually, this particular situation, when we have a lower level student who joins us, who we encounter when he's a teenager, is super challenging, because they are failing at the most important task in their life, communicating with the people around them, and they are also visibly worse. And being visibly worse is a terrible thing for a teenager, right? Making mistakes in front of other people, probably having the accent that is not as good as with other people in the classroom. That is a very challenging thing for a teenager. So actually, thinking back about interrupting him and correcting his errors as he was introducing himself, I can say that this was probably a methodological error of yours, because if we do it this way, then we focus the attention of everybody on the error that he has just made, and also we show that it's not that interesting for us what he really has to tell us about himself, because his English is not that good. So this can be, as weird as it is, this might be the interpretation of that teenager. So if you mentalize, if you try to interpret Mark's feelings, emotions and thoughts around this time, then one of the versions that I'd probably have is that he feels very insecure. He feels that if he starts talking in your class, he will show that he is worse than everybody else, and he doesn't want to show it. Even if he's not the worst student in the room, still for him it may seem that he is the worst student in the room. And also that that other people might not be interested in communicating with him because his English is so bad. So what I would do in this situation, I would not expose Mark for some time. I will find him a nice partner for pair work, right, who would sit next to him, and then I would first try and let Mark let Mark do some pair work, not talk to the whole class, but talk to the partner. Another thing that I can do with Mark is giving him preparation time before he has to talk. So allowing him to take some notes and then to talk. And when he talks, do not make instant error correction, right? Wait, right? And then if you can, don't give him this feedback, corrective feedback publicly, do it more privately after class. Or an alternative strategy is when you don't focus on the errors of this particular student, but you discuss all of the errors in a more systematic fashion after everybody has presented. So, but Mark in this way is like, this is a very typical problem with teenagers. So try to minimize this visible difference in levels. Talking about what's happening in teenage brain, I can refer you to a very interesting TED Talk by Sarah Jane Blakemore, who's one of the leading teenage brain researchers. So she actually does the functional MRI. Functional MRI is like a regular MRI the scanning of a human body that we use to see if everything is right with people and to diagnose certain diseases. The functional MRI, brain MRI, is when they see which areas of the brain are activated at which point of time. If you watch her TED Talk, you'll see that she also points at this not clear border of when adolescence actually finishes, right? Attaining a stable and independent role in society, well, a big question when this actually happens. And one more thing that she speaks a lot in her TED Talk is the development of the prefrontal cortex. Actually, prefrontal cortex is this area of the brain, and this area of the brain actually is the largest with humans. So out of all of the other mammals, we have the largest prefrontal, the most developed prefrontal cortex, which makes us unique. And some people believe that this is actually what makes us human. This area is in charge of social interactions, self-concept, and decision-making. And this area develops a lot with teenagers. Basically, this teenage years give a huge boost to the development of this particular area of human brain. As you can guess, because it's in charge of social interactions, it activates some other areas. So social interactions mean a lot to a teenager. If you actually compare the ability of a teenager, of a person who is 12 to mentalize, to interpret other people's feelings, thoughts, and the same ability of a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, you will see huge development in this area. One other thing that is a bit blocked around this age, that is the capacity that is reduced around this age, is control functions, right? So teenagers show poor impulse control. That is why you experience all of those changes in their behavior. But teenagers are way more risk-taking. If you think about yourselves, I'm sure that you can remember a couple of stories of the really crazy things that you did when you were teenagers. I think to a large extent this can be explained by this capacity to take more risk when you are a teenager. That later on, that's by the way another sign of the adolescence ending, because after that it normalizes and we become more rational in our thinking, less of risk takers. But if you think of teenagers, they do a lot of things that can that when you think back about this, oh, that could have killed me. All right, they are control functions, and their risk assessment functions are way less efficient than with an adult. And this development of self-consciousness, it's also due to the changes in prefrontal cortex. Now let's think about one more case. Elsa. Elsa is 14. She used to be one of the best students in her class, but now she has changed in many aspects. Her outfit, her friends, and her attitude to studies is completely different now. She seems hostile. In your class, she sometimes comes unprepared and often demonstrates complete apathy. Her speaking and writing skills have significantly deteriorated. Her mother told you that she had no control over the situation because her daughter does not listen to her at all. I want you to think about this situation, and I want you to refer what you see here to the characteristics of teenagers that we have discussed before. So can you please think of those characteristics? And one more additional task. In here, I have incorporated one of the typical language teacher's errors that lies in the area of general grammar. Can you please spot an error in this slide? You got 3 minutes to do this. Okay, let's start with the language thing, because I'm sure a lot of you are now thinking about this language error that's in there. And some of you might disagree that it's actually an error. Some of my native speaking friends would say that it's totally okay to use present simple in this particular case. I'm talking about has in here and does in here. But according to the rule, to the grammar rules, and according to what I would actually use in this particular case, must be had and did, right? Because you have the past tense before that. In this particular situation, I would actually say had no control over the situation, and the daughter didn't listen to her at all, because we are obviously discussing a situation from the past. Even though the previous parts of the sentence were given in present simple. So as I said, some of my colleagues might consider it an error, and according to the classic English grammar, it still is an error, although it's very widely used in spoken English. So you can decide for yourself whether you personally consider it an error or not. And if you do consider it an error, then you might want to focus a little more on it when you speak. If not, then don't focus on it. But when you present it, make sure that you explain it to the students. A very good thing to discuss with teenagers, how rules in language are not always rules. A very teenage thing about why we have rules and who said that these are rules and how do those rules work. In this essence, a very good thing to discuss. Now, talking about Elsa, I think that one of the most striking features here is this reassessment of reality, reevaluation of the reality around her. Because as you can see, things that she liked, such as studying, has changed. The thing has changed, things have changed. And one of the reasons for that is that she has changed as a person. So her outfit, her friends, everything has changed. So she's a new person right now, and this person must have new values and new likes. So the likes that she used to have, they are gone. And in this essence, you have to build new relationships with her. And once she seems hostile. Hostility is very often this protective reaction, right? Because you're probably trying to dig into why this has changed, and or at least you want her to acknowledge that this has changed, and she doesn't want it. That's why she can become hostile. Speaking and writing skills, their deterioration is normative. I've already spoken about developmental regression around this age. And the poor mother who has no control over the situation. Actually, I always feel sorry for the parents of teenagers. That's a super difficult period of time, because one of the huge dilemmas of a teenager is that parents are still the most important people in their lives. No matter what they say, it's like naturally so. Parents are very important for teenagers, even though the teenagers would never, many teenagers would never accept it, but parents are one of the things that has not changed. The attitudes of parents must change, and the relationships might change, but this very basic bond between parent and child, it has not changed. So parents are very important and very meaningful role models for teenagers, even though many teenagers would never agree that their parents are role models for them. Even though some teenagers actually acknowledge that. This inability to make sure that the daughter behaves in a way that her mother tells her, this pretty much goes again, this is also very normative, because in the previous period of time, let me remind you, especially in the case of Elsa, she probably did everything, she had done everything that her mother would tell her, and that's how it worked. But now it's different. Elsa realized that she is a different person now. So now she doesn't want to do what her mother tells her to, even if the things that her mother is telling her are very sensible things. That is why you're probably dealing here with a difficult case, and you as a teacher in this particular situation, if you build quality relations with Elsa, can be an even more reliable relational object for the child for some time. And I'm not neglecting the role of the parent now, I'm just saying that it's important for a teenager to have different relational objects around. So in terms of regression, what you experience with teenagers is a lack of focus, especially with younger teenagers. Probably the time between 11 and 13 is not the best period of time to hugely invest into accuracy, because this is physiologically not the best time for accuracy. The brain resource is in the other place. That's why there are so many mistakes and errors in teenage writing. You can invest into accuracy a little later when they are 16, 17, 18. That's a way more efficient period of time to do so. Teenagers are capable of understanding complex ideas around that age, and that is why it's really good to discuss those ideas with them. They actually start realizing that there is more than one view and more than one dimension. That's why you also they like discussing who thinks what and who says what, and showing that there are different attitudes. And teenagers like models at the same time, right? Ready models of behavior and role models that they can follow. And this verbal regression that you experience doesn't mean that you stop investing into the teenagers' verbal skills. Vice versa. You teach them how they tricks and strategies that would help them to become better speakers and better writers, that would help them express the ideas that they have and that they want to express. There is a lot of anxiety in this period of time. Anxiety is built around exams that students unfortunately have to take in this period of time. And here what you can do is you can give them strategies that will help them to prevent stress during the exam, because a lot of exam anxiety it can be overcome with the stress management strategies, breathing strategies, knowing that exam anxiety is when people exaggerate things a lot. So a teenager who's writing his or her exam is thinking, okay, if I fail this exam now, I'll never be able to get the profession that I want to get, or my mom and dad will stop loving me. And if you actually question this, if you see that the teenager is very worried during a practice test, and if you discuss it with them in the next class and say, I saw that you were very nervous, can you tell me what you thought back then? If they actually verbalize it, then you can question that. You can say, okay, you see your parents have already invested 15 years of their lives into you. Do you really think they will stop loving you if you fail one exam? Or okay, you failed the exam, let's say you failed the exam this year. Will you be able, we don't want this situation, but will you be able to retake this exam next year? Probably you will. Or if you don't enter this university, will you be able to enter a different university? Yes, you will. I'm not saying now that we tell it to all of the teenagers, because some of them actually need a little more focus and a little more value attached to the exam. But on the other hand, we don't invest in the opposite thing. We don't invest into anxiety. We don't tell them that, if you don't study hard, you will fail throughout your life, right? So that, because otherwise, if they really fail the exams, then for the society, it's not the best thing to have a person who is 18 years old and who thinks that they've already failed in this life, or at least in its social aspect. And relations. A very important thing for teenagers and for the people who teach teenagers is to know that teenagers treat everybody around them as relational objects. So the people around teenagers are relational objects and the teachers are relational objects. One of the worst things that you can do with teenagers is behave like a teacher, because then they realize that you are a function, you are not really a person. One of the best things that you can do with teenagers is build relationships. Because what teenagers would need to understand about you is what kind of person you are, and what your interests are, and what your values are. And if you demonstrate interest in their values and their views, then you can build a relationship. You as a teacher, if you build this relationship, will be a role model for them. And that is a huge responsibility, because there are things that we want to discuss with teenagers and things that we don't discuss with teenagers. Those things can be related to your lifestyle. Those things can be related to your past experience. You are very selective, because if you have this relationship with a group of teenagers, you are a role model for them. Things that they are usually interested in incorporate music and subcultures, but music and subcultures are here not just because teenagers are interested in them. Music and subcultures, especially music, is a very powerful emotional tool. Teenagers are all about emotional communication, so having some music in your lessons might help you to build better relationships with them. By adult topics in here, I don't mean sex and this kind of intimate relationships as such. I mean serious topics, topics that they did not discuss before. This can be, there are a lot of such topics around. Can be built around money, around interpersonal relationships, loyalty to ideas and to people, feelings. These are serious topics that people discuss. Discussing it with them as adults, treating them as equals in those discussions, being interested in their point of view, will help you build more effective communication with them. And then if you have this relation with them, you will be able to ask them to do something that is not exactly in their leading activity right now. To study some English grammar or vocabulary instead of communicating with peers. Because this will be a request coming from somebody who is important for them. And you also talk a lot about their personal future with them, because this is an important topic for most teenagers. Now, I will show you, having spoken about those topics, I will show you 5 texts from the forward book that some of you might be using. I will show you 5 texts, and I want you, they are all of them good texts, but I want you to grade those texts from potentially most interesting for a group of teenagers to the potentially least interesting for the group of teenagers. Right? I'll show you 5 texts. I'll give you some time to read those texts, and then I want you to tell me which of the texts you think is the most interesting text for a group of teenagers and which text might not be so interesting. Here is the first text. Take a minute to read this text. That it's a text about a teenage girl who's a comedian. You actually can go to YouTube and find a video with the same comedian, and show them that this is a real person, and this usually works very well with teenagers. And discuss it with them. So this is the first text. A text about Hardip Sidhu as a comedian. The next text is about holidays. Want a holiday with a difference? Have a look at these places. So this is a text about different resorts. Take a minute to read this text. Okay, I hope you've already read it. By the way, do you know how to read the name of this Greek god? Right, if that's something that you have to discuss in class, it's Poseidon. I had to revisit it myself before my last class where we discussed it, right? The names of Greek gods are always challenging. So this one is Poseidon. Last time I checked, at least. The next text, classical literature. Mrs. Sappleton is upstairs. Short story, right? Take a minute to read it. Okay, this was the third text. Now the fourth text, Beauty Through the Ages. Text about the concept of beauty. I'm sorry, it's cut at the bottom, but the reason I just want to give you an idea of what the text is all around. I want you to be able to assess the potential interest of your students really quickly. So this is another text, Beauty Through the Ages. The concepts of beauty. And now, hope you've already looked it through. The last text. Actions speak louder than words. That's actually the layout of the whole page. I want to show you the pre-reading exercise here. The text is about body language, and there are a lot of pictures around how body language affects our communication with other people. Now, one more time, this is the fifth text about body language, the text about beauty, text number 4, text number 3, classical literature, short story, text number 2 about hotels, and text number 1. Now, before I give you my ranking, and that's very subjective. I don't insist on any of it being right. I'm just sharing my personal opinion with you based on what I know about teenagers. In here I have Dmitry, who is helping us to run the whole thing. Dmitry, by show of fingers, can you tell me which of the 5 texts do you think is the most interesting text? Dmitry says that text number 5 would be the most interesting text for him when he was a teenager. Dmitry, the next text that you'd read, which of them? 5, 4, 3, well, 5 is already out of there. Out of it, 4, 3, 2, or 1? 4, text 4. Beauty Through the Ages. Right. Probably Dmitry was attracted by the image that we have in there. But you know what? Actually, a lot of teenage boys would be attracted by it as well. Dmitry, coming next is what? So we have short story, hotels, and comedian. Poseidon. The hotels, right? Then comedian or classical literature? Comedian, right. Very close to what I'd say. Text 4, with me it wouldn't be text 5, but it would be text 4 on the top, the text about beauty, because I think that teenagers think a lot about appearance, and reading about the changing image of appearance throughout time is something that might be really interesting for them. Then communication and gestures, because they feel so clumsy all the time. Learning some body language and learning to control their body language is what many of them would perceive as super useful. Then text 1, the text about the comedian, because it tells us a personal story. It tells us a story that we can relate to. Text 2 about the hotels, well, at least there is some relevance. And text 3, even though it's the story is actually interesting, I've read the story, it's pretty interesting, when you start it off, might be a little challenging because some of the teenagers might not feel the appeal of the story right away. So when you prepare to work on, say, a certain topic or on a text with teenagers, if you just think about these areas when you plan your lessons, I'm sure you will be able to design your lessons in a way more efficient way, because you will be able to, to hit to press the right buttons and to pull the right strings. And also educationally, this is going to be more efficient because you will be investing into their main developmental task. That is why I included it into this presentation. Now the final bits, talking about your behavior as a teacher. There are three main roles that you can play as a teacher, three main models of behavior. One of them is older peer. Older peer is one of them. I'm sure you have seen those teachers, right? Who come into the classroom wearing hoodies and pretending to be just like one of them, right? Slightly older, in charge of what's happening in the classroom, but still one of them. Another role is older sibling. Though these two roles are very similar, but an older sibling is way more authoritarian. It's still a sibling. He or she would communicate with the teenager as a person who cares about them, but it's still a person who treats them pretty much approximately at the same level, but not exactly at the same level, because it's an older sibling. So it's basically playing the role of an older brother or an older sister. And the third role is a respected professional. Here you show them that you are actually very cool, you are very professional. That's why, and you are interested in communicating with them, in helping them with what they want to develop, and sharing some of your expertise with them. But in this case, it's very important that you show them why you are so cool, and and you show them that they can learn something useful from you. Useful not from your point of view, but useful from their point of view. What's very important is that you should not mix those roles, because nothing is more confusing than a person trying to be an older peer one day and then a respected professional another day, and an older caring sibling the third day. Work on your model. Think about who you are in your relations with teenagers and act accordingly. Finally, let's guess the model. Let's think of you entering the classroom and saying the following phrases. The first one, "Hi guys, what's up?" The next one, "My classroom, my rules." The next phrase, "I wonder how many of you have succeeded in completing the home assignment." Now I want you to decide whether those phrases are more likely to be said by an older peer, an older sibling, or a respected professional. The next phrase, "The lesson is due." The next phrase, "Let's get through the boring stuff first." The next phrase, "I'll play this game with you." And "Would you like to talk about this issue?" Think who is more likely to use each of the phrases. Think about it for a minute. And now let me show you. You can, if you need more time, obviously you can pause the recording now. Think about it for as much time as you need, and then press play as soon as you are ready to classify those phrases. Let me show you how I would classify. Actually, all of those phrases were said by real teachers, and I could clearly observe their role as we were going through it. So, "Hi guys, what's up?" Older peer. Obviously very informal. Older peer is what the role was. "My classroom, my rules" was something said by a person who was playing down the older sibling lines, right? "My room, my rules. My classroom, my rules," right? I said them. And it's not because I'm a cool professional, not because I'm one of you. It is my classroom, right? I wonder how many of you have succeeded in completing the home assignment. This phrase was said by someone who was playing the respected professional line, right? Very formal, right? Very respectful attitude to the students. Complex grammar, though understandable. That was the phrasing that this particular teacher would use. And the same teacher would use this phrase, the lesson is due. Instead of saying that, come on, it's time to start, hey, the lesson is due, right? Very formal again, useful in terms of formal English, but this person could actually do that. Let's get through the boring stuff first. Older peer, obviously, because you characterize some of the stuff that you have to get through as boring. Personally, I never use the word boring. I can use the word technical. Right? Let's get through the more theoretical stuff first, or let's get through the more technical stuff first. I'll play this game with you is something down the lines of an older sibling or a respected professional. Right? So you actually show that, okay, this game I'm going to play with you. Because an older peer plays all the games with them. Right? And now would you like to talk about this issue is more towards respected professional, right? Because you still give them choice, right? An older peer would probably say, an older sibling would say, okay, let's talk about that. And an older peer would say, come on, we need to talk about that, right? So different roles. The do's and the don'ts with teenagers. Let's start with the don'ts. First, as I said, don't talk about their looks. Very sloppy path. Don't give negative feedback in public. The effects can be really bad. Don't pretend to be their best friend, because you are not, right? And even if you are, you would want them to have other best friends than you. You can be a really good friend. I'm not saying that the teacher, especially the language teacher, can't or shouldn't be a good friend of their students. This is possible. Especially if that's your relationship that you have built, it's okay. Don't try to be their only friend, right? The very best friend. They must have other friends than you, and it's very important. Don't interrupt them when they talk, because talking is very difficult for them, right? So don't interrupt them when they're doing this. Never call them children. This can kill your relationship with a teenager, right? Because they are all about proving the whole world that they are no longer children. And somewhere inside they still have doubts of whether they are children or not, right? So don't call them that. Don't treat them as children. That goes logically. That's a logical conclusion from the previous point. And don't neglect their interest. Show interest in what they want to tell you, and use their interest in your lessons. The do's: do use their interests and hobbies, as I've just said. Establish interpersonal relationships with each of your teenage students. Give them pair and group work tasks so that they can develop in their main leading area of development. Use active listening. If you have forgotten what active listening is, revisit the second workshop of Unit 1. That's where I spoke about active listening. Use self-assessment with them, so give them self-assessment forms, because they are all about finding out who they are. Self-assessment is actually one of the tools that works pretty well with this group, even though they will tend to underestimate themselves, but here is where you can actually reassess it together with them. Use role play and role cards, especially role plays and role cards built around typical teenage situations. Use films and music as powerful emotional tools. Discuss people and their relationships with them. I mean, not the people around you, not your colleagues, but overall people and relationships of people. And constantly reflect. You reflect, you set the right example, and give them a chance to reflect on their learning. And above all, if you have a group of teenagers, what's really important is that you communicate with them and that you enjoy this communication. So I hope understanding them better will help you unite more interest in what is going on with them, how they are changing. That's a tremendously interesting period of time. That's one of the periods that I personally miss. And through one tiny bit of my work where I actually get to interact with teenagers, I can feel those, I can go back to that period, and I can feel how the changes that have happened to me back then still affect me, and how through helping them verbalize what's going on with them, through helping them understand it better, through giving them support that would allow them to feel more confident, I can make their lives considerably better. And for me as a teacher, that's an amazing feeling. So good luck with your communication with teenagers, enjoy it, and well done on completing the second unit of our course. Thank you.